Today on Paul's Old Crap, we've got a Motorola Macintosh clone, and we're going to go ahead and install the Windows 95 operating system onto it. Now, before you get too excited, this all relies on a piece of hardware called the Apple PC Compatibility Card, which is basically like having a small Pentium computer inside your Macintosh. So before we jump into the Windows installation, we're going to take a look at one of the most important components, that being this card here, which is the Apple PC Compatibility Card, though sometimes it's referred to as the Apple DOS Compatibility Card. They made a few different versions of this one being the PCI card, which basically works in, I believe, any PCI-based Macintosh. It is a large card. This is a 12-inch card, so it has to be a large case for this to fit inside of it. Earlier versions of the Apple DOS cards were made for like the Apple PDS and stuff like that. But yeah, for this video, we're going to specifically look at this PCI card. And one of the things you will probably need is this video dongle thing. So what this does is it's got this one port that has a lot of pins on it. It connects right to this side of the card, and then we have this plug here, which then plugs into the original video output on your Macintosh. So it is the old style video port, not VGA. So when you're doing this, if you're wanting to use a Mac that has a VGA card, you have to get like a custom adapter or something like that, and that might be a bit of a pain. So to make this easier on you, you might want to just use one that has the old Macintosh video plug there. And then the other end of this cable is the same thing. It's basically the reverse of the Mac video port, and this is what you actually plug your monitor into. And for this project, I will be using a VGA adapter plugged into this. So basically, it's just one of these video converters, and that plugs in like that and lets you use a VGA monitor on your output. So if you don't have one of these, there are other options, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Obviously, having this video cable would be the most convenient and most compatible way to do this. If you're checking on eBay, typically the card alone won't carry too much value if it doesn't have the matching cable. There are a few different types of these cables that came out with these different cards, so you also need to make sure that if you're picking up one of these cards, you have the proper cable to go with it. I'm assuming this is the right cable for this card because it does work no problem. I've seen some of these cables that have like additional ports on them for like the game port or something like that. But on this particular card, it does already have the game port, so that's not part of the dongle thing. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Anyway, the only thing I will note on this card, I don't believe this little cooler here was available from the factory. One reason I say that is because it's got two different types of screws here, which is probably not something that Apple would have done. So I'm assuming a previous owner of this card had attached this cooler to it. So I'm not sure if this ever did have cooling on it, although as a Pentium 166, I would probably prefer to run this with a cooler either way. But let's take a look at some of the components on this card though. So when we look at the two ports that are on this card, like I said, we do have the game port here for like a joystick or something like that. And then over here, this is the port that basically lets the video output from the PC card tie in with the video signal from your Macintosh using the previously mentioned dongle cable thing here. And this is, it looks like it's a proprietary type connection here. So if you don't have the dongle cable, I believe you can find some sort of pinout online to make your own. But yeah, it is a proprietary cable, which means you will need that to use the card, and that's why cables themselves are also pretty rare and expensive on places like eBay. Now, one thing I believe is some sort of secondary video option is this port here. Down here it says it's labeled on the board as GIMO. And I believe this was an internal connection which would allow you to run your video signal directly into the internal video circuitry of the computer. Now, this wasn't an option on all types of Macintoshes at the time, but I believe there were certain systems such as the Performa 6400 or maybe the Power Macintosh 6500 that would have had this same type of header on either the logic board or something like that, and that would allow you to actually run some sort of ribbon cable from this port right into the video circuitry directly. So instead of having to have that dongle cable come out of here, you could actually switch to PC mode and have it run directly through here without needing that external cable. And I believe if you were using that option, it would actually let you run the PC mode as a window inside of the computer instead of having it take over your entire video signal. But I don't have that hardware available, so I'm not going to be able to demonstrate that for this video. So if you start off looking around the lower part of the card here, it looks like we do have these chips here, which apparently are video memory chips. And it actually says 256K times, I guess, 16 and then 60 nanoseconds, 5 volt. I don't know, basically just the specs of these chips or something like that. And these happen to be right next to the ATI video chip. Now, unfortunately, this is going to be upside down, but this is the Mach 64 chipset from ATI to drive the video. And if we look over here, this is some sort of expansion port that I'm not actually sure what is supposed to plug into this. Yeah, I don't know. It's not going to be memory or anything because it does actually have a memory slot up here. So this might have been some sort of possibly a add-on for the sound card. This does have integrated sound, which is, we'll get to that in a minute here, but I'm thinking there might have been some sort of extra sound module that you could add to that, but I could be wrong. Over on this side here, we have a chip that says Phoenix 94, which might be the actual BIOS for that drives this. And that's also just a guess, though. I'm not entirely sure. And then we do also have here the Opti, and then it says Viper. And I think this is part of just the required chipset, like to drive the whole thing. I'm kind of at a loss for words to properly describe it, but when you look at a PC motherboard, you have various chips that are just like the main chipset of the motherboard, and like a PC motherboard, this needs things like that to work. So if we look near the top of the board here, we do have some of these audio plugs. So we start off with, it looks like CD input. So if you want to play specifically music CD from your CD-ROM drive, I think you'd have to route that through here. And then we do have, I think it looks like standard sound output. So this port and potentially this port as well, I might need to have hooked up somewhere into the system. I'll have to look into this more in detail. This might be required in order to actually run system sound from the PC board through into the internal Mac speaker. So yeah, that might be required there. For the CD-ROM audio, I don't really care, so I'm not going to hook that up. We do have one RAM slot here, and it does say it's 168 pin DIMMs, looks like 70 nanosecond 5 volt DRAM. So this is kind of a bit of a pain for this memory. It's not SD RAM that you'd find in a lot of like Pentium computers around this era. Yeah, it's the same number of pins, but it's not SD-RAM. It's basically just, it's the same type of RAM, I believe, that some of the Power Macintosh computers used around this same time. So I happen to have some of this stuff kicking around, and I will be installing this particular 16 megabyte SIM, or DIMM rather, into the RAM slot there. And when we look at what we've got right underneath it, it does actually have a bunch of RAM already on here. This particular board does actually include, I believe, 16 megabytes of onboard memory, both here and on the other side of the board, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Some of the earlier boards, I believe, came with around 8 megabytes. So having 16 megabytes on board is not bad, and I already had extra RAM, so we're going to upgrade that as well, although you probably wouldn't need a whole lot of RAM for this thing anyway. So underneath this heatsink is the Intel Pentium 166. I tried to see about removing this heatsink because I wanted to also apply some new heatsink compound, but for some reason the thing doesn't really want to move, and I'm not really interested in breaking this before I even get the video done. So I'll need to look at that at some point in the future. But then we do have a bunch of these chips right next to it, which I believe would be something like extra L2 cache, potentially. So, yeah. Other than that, I think that covers most of the important chips that are on the front side of this board. So when we jump over to the rear of the board, I think one of the more important chips that are back here, that includes this one here. This is the Vibra 16 sound chip from Creative Labs. This is basically it's kind of like a budget version of the Sound Blaster 16, I believe, and it's basically got that all as a chip on the back here. And I do also see this here, it's an LSI chip, and this one's kind of strange because on the chip here it says Mustard Revision 1, and I'm not too sure what that's supposed to be. When I look at LSI, I think they do like disk controllers and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I assumed that would be related to, but I'm not entirely sure. So as we were talking about on the other side of this board, we do have some more of the onboard RAM here, which I'm pretty much assuming that's what these chips are here. So I think this is the equivalent of like 8 megabytes on this side, and then we had the other 8 on the other side. And then we do also have 2 more of these Opti chips. So this is Viper on it, which I believe is some sort of chipset that basically makes all of this stuff talk to each other or something along those lines. I don't know. I don't really know how computers work. I just plug them in and they do things. So yeah. So obviously the computer is another important component that we need to talk about here. The computer I'm using is the Motorola StarMax 3000, which interestingly enough actually does use VGA as its normal video. Although in this particular system, I did install this ATI video card that has the older Mac style video port, because the onboard VGA on this thing, for some reason, it doesn't really work as great as I'd like. The ATI video card gave me more video memory since the upgrade for the VGA was impossible to find. So this was like the only PCI Macintosh that I had that had one of these older style video ports on there. So, and this computer is unfortunately a little bit dirty because I haven't bothered to do a full refurbish on there, but we are going to be using this PCI slot right at the top there. And one thing I will note, on this particular board, I do have this strange plug here that also has GIMO written on it, which I believe is that sort of internal connection that you could use between the video circuitry on here and the PC card, but its plug is way different from what I see on the PC card, so I have no idea how I would tie the card into this, nor can I find a single thing on eBay related to this at all. So yeah, unfortunately we're going to be stuck using the dongle cable for this purpose, but yeah. Anyway, the installation of the PC card is fairly straightforward, so I'm not going to bother showing that. Alright, so we have the card installed into the computer. It does kind of hang a little low over here, which I don't really like, but you know, it's a large card, so I mean, there's nothing that braces it on this side either. So at some point I might rig something in there so it doesn't just kind of like hang that low. But anyway, we do have a copy of Windows 95 that we're going to be using for this install. And the one I'm going to be doing is actually just on a burned CD here. This is basically Windows 95 OSR 2. And I've picked that because I think it was an earlier version of Windows 95, one of the ones that's actually in this box. And I ran into a crash during the actual test installation. So we're using OSR 2, which is I think one of the latest of the Windows 95 releases. And that seemed to work fine for my testing. And in order to actually get that to work, we have a boot disk. This is there's There's a Windows 98 bootable floppy disk image out that's on the internet, easy to find. I wrote that to a floppy disk, and you do actually have to do customizations to this in order to make your CD-ROM drive work, because the CD-ROM driver that makes your Macintosh CD-ROM drive work with the PC card is actually a driver provided by Apple. So you actually have to put that driver file on here, edit your config.sys and your autoexec.bat, and that's how you get the CD-ROM to work, because without the CD-ROM working, you can't install Windows. So what we're going to do is we're going to power up our computer, and we're going to take a look at what changes we needed to make on the floppy disk, and then we'll proceed to actually boot into the Windows installer. Okay, so what we're going to do is get the software all ready to go for our Windows 95 installation. What I've opted to do here is do a direct video capture off of the dongle that hangs off of the PC card. Now, unfortunately, this will make it a little weird to see some of the DOS resolutions. They look much better on a directly connected monitor, but I didn't want to just use a video camera on the monitor. I wanted to do a capture so you could kind of see some of this in more detail. But yeah, it will kind of ruin the experience when you're looking at the actual PC startup, because some of the elements get kind of cropped off the screen. So yeah, anyway, I am running macOS 8.1 on this computer, which is the end of the support for the software for this PC card. There was a third party that developed an edition called PC Setup that installs on top of the PC Compatibility 1.6.4 software, and that will allow you to use the card with macOS 8.5 and 8.6 and up. But yeah, with macOS 8.1, this version here, 1.6.4, is supported, and this was the last version of the PC software that Apple released directly. So, before we get into the actual PC card, I'm just going to demonstrate the software that's in here. I've already installed this, obviously, to test, but basically what you would do is you would just mount the first disk, run the installer, and it would say, yeah, this is how you install your stuff, and then easy install, blah, 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 and then you'd reboot the computer. And once you rebooted, then you would see this little icon down your control strip. It's also a control panel that's called PC Setup. And assuming this shows up, that would mean that you have a PC card installed. And if this doesn't show up, then that means it doesn't detect the card properly, or you might have an incompatible card. If you've got like an old Quadra or something with one of those Houdini cards, I don't think this software is the one you use. I think you use the one that's up here, this DOS compatibility one. I'm not too sure, but for the PCI cards, this version here, the 164, should be the one you need. Anyway, we're going to get this off my desktop. You'll notice that there is a second image. We're going to open this one because this one is also very important for your software. This is actually a DOS disk, and what this has inside of it is basically some optional drivers for the Windows side operating system, which lets it communicate better with the Macintosh. I think some of this might include like the network drivers to do the shared networking magic. I haven't actually done that yet in my testing, but I'm sure we will get to that in this video. But one very important thing that's in here, this file here, cd-rom.sys, this is the driver that controls the Apple CD-ROM drive in the DOS environment. And you will need to have this set up on your boot disk before you can perform your Windows 95 install, because Windows 95 is on a CD-ROM drive. Now, the way to do this, I think that's probably the easiest, is to go and download the Windows 98 boot disk that already has all of the CD-ROM driver stuff set up in it, and then copy this file here, cd-rom.sys, over to that boot disk, and then you have to alter your config.sys and autoexec.bat to basically point it to that file as well. And there's documentation that can be found easily online that has the exact commands to use for that. So it's not very difficult at all. So But once you have that set up on a disk, then you can perform your boot. And I've already got that standing by, so what we're going to do is, I think we're going to jump into PC mode. Now, so yeah, my video capture is going to kind of make this look kind of weird, but yeah. First thing we need to do here is, oh yeah, I guess we have to do our setup. I did actually try creating a drive before here called crap, but for the sake of demonstration, we're just going to make a new one. So your C drive, you go to a new drive file, and then anywhere on your hard drive, you can just say, okay, I want to make a, let's say a 300 megabyte file. And then this option is just by default initialize drive file, which I think actually makes the DOS file system on there. And this will just take a moment to finish preparing. The other options that are on here, this monitor and this dim option, I think these have always been grayed out on mine, even when the computer has been running, the PC card that has been running, so I have no idea what that stuff is. Over here, this sharing folder is kind of like some sort of custom file sharing between the Mac and the Windows PC, and this doesn't do anything when you click it unless you've got those add-on drivers from this other disk here, and I think we should be able to get to that in this video. We'll see. And yeah, so I'm hoping this works properly. My Mac has been giving me some grief, but okay, I think that's fine. No error messages popped up. You do have the option of adding a D drive. This is something that I'll note right now, although I won't actually attach it. I did also create a second virtual disk that specifically has the Windows 95 install files. And the reason for that is as soon as you install Windows 95 and then you reboot the computer, you'll lose your CD-ROM drive, because you have to manually put your Apple CD-ROM driver into your new Windows 95 installation. And if you don't, the CD-ROM drive won't be there anymore. So what I did last time I was doing this for testing is I dumped all the Windows 95 install files onto a second hard drive. That way, when I booted back into Windows 95, I was able to actually still access the installer files, because every time you make a change in Windows, it requires the install files to be available. So yeah, that was the easiest way, instead of trying to hack apart the config.sys in Windows 95 and make that work again. So yeah. But other than that, we do have options for COM1 and COM2 if you want to point them to the modem port, for example. And then this one goes to, well, I guess for some reason my printer port is not available, so I don't know why that is. But yeah, if you really want to map the Windows COM ports to physical serial ports, that's how you would do that. Anyway, the only other thing to really note inside the PC setup is you need to know this hotkey, which is by default Command Return. This is how you switch between the Mac and the PC environment. This is critical because once you get into the PC environment, the only way to get back out is the hotkey, or you have to force your computer to restart with the power button. So yeah, you don't want to get stuck in the DOS environment and forget how to get back out. So what we're going to do is, oh yeah, right down here, just says status PC is shut down. This means the actual PC is not running yet. So yeah, what we're going to do is just close out that and basically experience the PC turning on. So first thing I do is I go start PC, and then I go switch to PC. And then this is going to display a bunch of weird stuff from my capture device. The resolution is not so great, and unfortunately it kind of cuts off part of the screen. But you should be able to see on the screen that this does say we do have a Pentium processor. The clock speed is 166 megahertz, and we do have 32 megabytes of RAM. And it's saying that we have an invalid system disk because we don't have anything in there right now. The C drive is blank. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my Windows 98 boot disk into the floppy drive, and then I'm going to push return. And it should start bringing up text momentarily, although you won't really be able to see it very well. Okay, there it says starting Windows 98. And now it's bringing up the Apple PC Compatible CD-ROM driver. And this should continue loading. And it says my CD-ROM is drive E. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to hop over to my C drive. And the bottom of the screen is missing, so you can't see what I'm typing. But it looks like I do have a proper blank C drive. What I'm going to do now is insert the Windows 95 CD into the CD-ROM driver. Or CD-ROM drive, rather, not driver. And once that is read, we will proceed with the Windows installation. So as you can see further up the screen, it says the drive E is my CD-ROM drive. So if you can just barely see it, but the DIR results show that we do actually have the Windows 95 drive. And we're going to go ahead and run setup. And I'm hoping that this displays enough on my screen that I can proceed with this. Enter? Okay, yeah, like I can't even see that part of the text. So, yeah, doing this on capture is super annoying. Oh, okay, so this is actually much better. Once we get into the setup, it's not bad. Okay, welcome to Windows 95 setup. Continue. I love this screen. Although, at the time, I actually hated Windows 95, but I still liked it. Okay. So anyone who used PCs back in this era, this should all be familiar. Because, I mean, basically, we are just running the Windows setup on, from its perspective, on a Pentium computer. License agreement. And what is it going to do? Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Next. Directory, C drive, Windows. Sure, that sounds reasonable. Preparing the directory. And it's checking that my hard drive is actually blank. And setup options. Let's just jump down in. Oh, you know what? What the heck? Let's do a typical Windows installation. No big deal. Funny enough, I'm going to use the certificate of authenticity from the actual physical copy of Windows that I'm doing this video with, which is it's actually nice that I bought this on eBay a while back just to have a boxed copy of Windows. Yeah. And let's see. All right, next. What I'm going to do here is not check these off. When I was doing my testing, Windows doesn't have, or did not appear to have, a driver already for the Vibra 16 chipset that's on this card. So I'm going to not bother clicking that, and we'll deal with the drivers, I think, later. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Next. And this is going to look for various hardware on the computer. And the first couple times around that I was doing this, I don't recall it ever crashing for me. So it should be fine. But this might take a couple minutes, so I'm just going to fast forward the video here. Okay, so that seemed to work fine. And it says Windows comes with a variety of components. We're just going to go ahead and use the most common components because whatever. If you're really doing a custom Windows 95 build, then that might be a different topic for another day. I do not want to create a startup disk. Next. And now it's going to copy the files over to the hard drive, I suppose. And this process itself, I believe, will also take a few minutes. So I don't think I have enough filler talk to fill this time completely. So I'm just going to fast forward this as well. Okay, looks like the file copy is done and it's about to restart. So what I'm actually going to do is before we actually boot into the first time boot of Windows 95, I'm going to actually shut down the PC. But I'm just going to have to go finish. And okay, so here's the fun part. It says setup detected a disk in the floppy drive, and that's true. My Windows boot disk is still in the floppy drive. Macintoshes don't have eject buttons. So this is what you do, as far as I know. If you do the hotkey to go back into the Macintosh, then I hit Command-Shift-1, and the disk physically ejects from the drive. Then I guess I can hit the hotkey again, and then go back into Windows. And that way, my boot disk is not still in the drive when I restart this. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and do the restart. And now I'm going to actually hop back into the Mac side, I think. Yep. And then I'm going to go, come on. And, whoops. Do a shutdown. Yes. Because I'm going to actually attach a second virtual disk with the Windows files. Let's see. If I'm not mistaken, I called it WinTest. This one here. And we're going to close that. And just for fun, I'm going to see if my PC thing will work here. Should be able to mount this. Yes. These PC drives, you can actually mount them right on your Mac desktop. So when we open this one, inside of it is the Win95 folder that I previously copied off the CD-ROM drive. And just for fun, we're also going to mount the disk that has our DOS driver stuff on here. Over in the WinTest, let's make a new folder, and we're going to call it crap. And then everything from this, we're going to copy over. So when we bounce back into the Windows install and complete all of that installation, then I want to try installing this extra driver stuff. Okay. So what we do is we unmount that. Let's eject our Windows CD because the CD-ROM drive won't work anymore anyway until you do the driver reinstallation in the Windows 95 side. All right, so what we're going to do here is do the start PC, switch to PC, and hopefully this starts booting Windows 95 if I didn't screw it up. Oh, starting Windows 95. The bottom part of this kind of gets cropped out, unfortunately. That little like animated status bar, loading bar thing. But yeah, we are loading Windows 95 on our Macintosh, which is really weird, but it's also cool at the same time. So it's doing its first time run, so it's going to like reinitialize all my crap, I guess. It might take a minute or two. And it's, I guess, relaunching the setup thingy-majig. Oh, because it's going to find some hardware and it's going to need us to use the Windows. Yeah, it's doing the plug-and-play hardware detection. So this is where I ran into that problem in my initial testing, because it did this, and then it's going to find something to install, but then my CD-ROM drive by this point was no longer there because I'm no longer booting off of that custom boot disk I made. So that's why I attached, yeah, see, here we go. Please insert the CD-ROM. But then when you go to browse, you don't have a CD-ROM anymore. Your E drive is gone. So that's why this drive here, WinTest, and then you just open up the Win95 folder and it finds that cab file. So this is how you solve problems. You think ahead. And then what you do is just go OK. And now it's able to actually find the files from the setup archive that it needs to complete. Now, depending on what it's looking for, you probably could just go and skip the installation and then go back and then install the Apple CD-ROM driver in DOS so that it gives you your CD-ROM driver again. But typically, I think if you're doing a Windows 95 installation, it really helps having a copy of that Win95 directory available for this because, yeah, literally every change you make, it's going to like require access to those files again. So you might as well just have a copy instead of installing or inserting the CD each time you do this. So I'm just making sure the mouse still moves. And okay, oh, still going. Start menu programs. I guess when we did the typical install, it did install a lot of extra crap. So if you're a pro user, you might want to do the custom install. So no, I don't have a printer. Okay. And it's yep, it's rebooting the computer yet again. That American Megatrends BIOS screen, it's too bad that doesn't stay up longer. I would like to see more about what's actually displayed on there, but yeah. And I don't know if you can actually enter the BIOS because that PC setup control panel is what controls all of that in the first place. So I don't think you can actually enter the old style BIOS through the PC side and do any changes because, yeah, that just wouldn't work, but that's interesting. But hey, we now have Windows installed. So let's start off with some of the basics. Here's a tip. On the Macintosh, you probably only have one mouse button, so you might be wondering, how do you right-click on things? If you hold down the Command key and then click, it produces a right mouse button click. So we can go ahead and go to Properties, and we are currently registered to Paul's Crap Unemployed, and it basically just says we are a Pentium with 32 megabytes of RAM. And if we hop over to Device Manager, yes, as I noted before, the Vibra 16 plug-and-play apparently isn't plug-and-play enough to actually work. So, yeah, maybe in Windows 98, I have no idea. Yeah, everything else is basically just Windows 95. Let's take a look at display because it should have... Oh, yeah, okay. So the ATI Mach 64 driver is properly installed. Unknown monitor, sure. We are running in a very basic resolution, though. I'm going to bump this up to 800 by 600, and we're going to give it high color, although, yeah, no. Restart, seriously? Oh, God, whatever. I'm hoping this didn't break it, so, yeah. Oh, okay, it's looking good so far. Yes, I believe this does look better than what we had before. And I don't want Windows 95 tips each time. So, yeah, this isn't too bad. So this is 800 by 600 resolution, not half bad. Let's jump into the win test. And, okay, what did we have to do? I think it said rerun setup. Well, let's run this. PC compatibility setup. Okay. PC compatibility for Macintosh. This looks promising. This program installs the optional features. Okay, that sounds good. Install to C drive Apple. That looks so bizarre, but sure. Oh, hey, look. Install CD-ROM support. Yeah. Okay, so this is where... Oh, okay. So it allows us to install something that lets you copy and paste between the Mac and the PC. The folder sharing, which is that one of the options that we saw inside of inside that control panel. CD-ROM support, yes, that is very nice. And then help, but nobody needs help. And we'll just give this a moment to do its thing. And of course, we have to restart. Taskbar icon, that's fascinating. Okay. And we restart the computer. I don't know about you, but this is kind of exciting. If I was trying to do like Windows business stuff on my Macintosh way back in the 90s, this might actually be interesting, but yeah. And I guess we're still going to have to... oh, look, the CD-ROM driver. Yeah, it's kind of weird to see, but yeah, it looks like the CD-ROM driver has loaded. So once we jump back into Windows here, there's a little Apple icon in my Windows. Oh, hey, there's a button that ejects the floppy drive. Wow. It's almost like they anticipated this sort of problem. That's funny. If we go back to my computer, hey, look, our CD-ROM drive has returned. So, in fact, this is basically how you do it then. You don't have to do it manually. You just have to make sure you have those files available. And when you do your Windows installation, you run that setup after. Now, the one thing that's confusing me is how do I make the network function? Because this is going to be strange. I don't understand how the network works. I don't think this is going to do anything. NDIS driver, because... let's take a look under, so if we jump back into this folder, we jump back into crap. I don't think that is what we're looking for. I think potentially under DOS. Nope, that's nothing. OEM setup. And what about disk 1? Nope. What is... I don't... why is this not letting me click things? Weird. Let's just try... Oh, whatever. Okay, let's just tell it D drive crap. PC card network driver was found. That might be something. Huh. Oh, okay. We want to add TCP, though, as well. Microsoft TCP IP. Properties. Yeah, what the heck. Let's just try leaving that as everything default, and then we click OK. You must provide... what do I have to do here? I have to go Properties. Windows NT domain. Shoot. Let me just drop it down to Windows Logon. I think that's what I want. Hit OK. Computer workgroup names. Something... Oh, under identification, computer name. Let's call it... Haha, what? And give it a work group. And, of course, please insert the Windows NA5 CD-ROM. So that was Win95, and then OK. So now, hoping it goes and installs all of its required driver files for the networking. And I do have the my Ethernet set up on the Mac side, so the Mac side should already have networking. I'm wondering if this is some sort of weird pass-through that works. I only did so much research on this before I decided to actually start this video, so all of this right now is new territory. I've never done this in my life. This is all kind of a fun experiment. Oh, hey, restart your computer. Oh, God. Hurry up. So, yeah, that second DOS disk from the original compatibility software package, that appears to have like all of these extra drivers that you need to make the Windows installation work. And this is, yeah, like I said before, this is Windows NA5 OSR2. So the card was manufactured in 97, so some of this might be easier with Windows 98 if you were inclined to do that. My personal preference, though, is any computer below a Pentium 2 grade. I typically use Windows 95 or earlier, so. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. DHCP client was unable to... well, that's unfortunate. I don't want a password. Let me in. So, okay. Unfortunately, it looks like our network is going to be a little bizarre. All right, I'm going to hit Command-Enter, and we're going to bring up the Mac side. And there was a little icon that showed up for converting the clipboard, it looked like. If we go back into the Open PC setup thing here, yeah, these are still like blanked out. Over here, it looks like I can manually pick like F drive to be a folder on my hard drive. Let's just go and what was an incoming? I think I had a bunch of just random crap in there. I think what we're going to do is, yeah, let's just select that. This is insanely pointless because it's all a bunch of Mac files in there, but what is sound? Okay, auto enable, yeah. The sound, though, that still, I don't think, is functioning because I think physically I need to have that strange cable go from the card to the logic board where the CD-ROM audio used to be, but I don't have a cable long enough to reach, so that's unfortunate. one thing I actually want to do, let's just see. I want to test this. Notepad. We're going to select all. We're going to copy. And just to be sure it copied, we're going to actually select it from the menu. And then we're going to, I guess we'll just hit the hotkey. Jump back into our Windows computer. From here, let's run Notepad and then hit Control V. Well, nothing yet. What if we did edit, paste? Oh, Control, not Command. Can you see? Okay, there we go. Yes, so at least we have the clipboard being able to pass from the Mac to the PC. Another thing we were going to do, though, is... well, let's go back into, let's close this out, go into my computer. Here we go. We now have F drive, and that was the incoming folder where I had a bunch of Mac files. So none of this is going to be relevant at all, but this is how you set up folder sharing between the Mac and the PC side. So if you really didn't want to just like mount the hard drive to transfer files between the Mac and the PC, you could set up like a folder on your Mac and then use that for relaying files back and forth between the environments. That is super interesting. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically just stop the capture for now. And I'm going to do more research on how to get the networking set up so that my Windows environment can access the internet. So hopefully I will be able to pick up with that soon. Okay, so I have made some progress. So we're going to take a look at how we have our network. Just to verify that it is working, I'm going to go into the Internet Explorer. And it is loading one of my outside websites that I use for network testing on old computers. So that is all good. If we take a look at, if we go into the network control panel here, so what I've ended up with is just the client for Microsoft Networks, the PC Card network driver, which was a driver file installed from that that driver floppy disk from the original PC Card software. And then you do also have to make sure you have the TCP/IP. And the properties for this, I did manually specify the IP address again. And then your standard settings, your gateway, and if you configure yourself a DNS server. And that was all good there. And then under this setnet, I'm not entirely sure what exactly how this works, but so I do have the TCP/IP enabled here under Ethernet 2, and then I have ARP and RARP here enabled under Ethernet 2. IPX I just left because whatever, who cares? So yeah, this is how I have this protocol set up thing, but I don't know how that then interacts with the operating system, and I can't really find any information about that. But yeah, that's basically how I got the network to work under Windows. And when we look at the sound, I unfortunately, it looks like I can't play sound, although I did get the driver installed. So when we look at, let's take a look at, we go to the properties and the device manager. So it's no longer that question mark listing there. Now if we actually go under sound controllers, we do have Creative Sound Blaster 16 plug and play. And if we look at the properties, it says this device is working. I installed a driver, blah, 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 something, something, automatic settings, whatever. But no sound actually plays out of my speaker. And I think the reason that is because I'm missing all of the accessories this card would have come with. When I was looking at some documentation online, it looks like the audio and video from the PC card would have been carried out one of two ways, one being that ribbon cable that we were looking at originally, and the other being the little patch cable for CD-ROM audio. It looks like that would patch through the CD-ROM audio input on the logic board, and then you would kind of run your CD-ROM driver to the PC card, then the PC card down to the logic board. But none of those cables came with my card because I bought it used without any of the accessories except for the dongle for video. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to try and source one of those cables eventually to actually get my audio working. Because, yeah, the driver seems to work. But if I go to, let's just hop under like audio. Let me see if I can open up this wave editor. And then if we go open, and then under my Vibra 16, under samples, just a wave file. So this is basically a sound file, but if I click play, it apparently plays and then stops, but I don't hear a single thing at all through the system. So yeah, it sounds like the way the audio patches through the PC card, it's probably going through that one CD audio input. And I don't have the patch cables to make that happen. So that is unfortunate, but for reference, I did actually throw that driver on an FTP server, which is how I got it to this computer in the first place. This is basically how I got all of my drivers in here. And I did actually find, I got a copy of like old WinRAR to expand this stuff, but under driver, this one here, this file, Vibra 16 win95.zip, there's like 3 disk images that you run the setup from, and that did contain the working driver for this sound card, or the sound chip rather. So I will eventually try to get that to work at some point in the future, but other than that, though, we do have working network, and we do have the sound driver, albeit no actual sound. And I mean, that's pretty much it for Windows 95. If you're doing a full-on customization, you'd want to get some add-ons. I can't remember. I have a blog article somewhere about all the extra things you'd add to Windows 95, like DirectX and some other extras for application compatibility. I don't actually remember them offhand, but yeah, that's basically, though, how you install Windows 95 on a Macintosh. It's been a very interesting experiment, and yeah, some of this stuff I still don't know exactly how it works, but it does work, and it's pretty interesting. And the switching between the Mac and the PC, that works pretty conveniently. So, I mean, this is definitely a nice solution if you did want to run Windows on your Macintosh and you didn't want the loss of speed when you were doing like emulation, because that always would go slow, especially on a computer like this where it's a 200 megahertz power PC. If you're running Windows 95, you're probably doing tops like 486 speed, and you know that's probably not acceptable for most people. So yeah, anyway, I think what I'll do is actually there's one thing I wanted to look at. If we jump back into the PC control panel, oh yeah, auto enable. So I don't imagine this would be a problem. It's enabled. Let's just double check this in case I made a hilarious oversight. But I think this is a physical hardware thing that's not letting me play audio. Let's just jump into the wave editor again. And if we open a file, yeah, I hear absolutely nothing out of the computer speaker. Okay. So anyway, if we go shut down here, Now safe to turn off your computer. So then we jump back to the Mac OS, and we can shut down the PC. Okay, so yeah, it looks like networking, not that bad to set up. But yeah, sound. If you don't have all the accessories, sound will probably be a problem.